Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renier Kutsia. I am from the Faculty of Community and Health Sciences, and I work at the School of Public Health. I would just like to welcome everyone, all our presenters and those listening in, those also who are following on YouTube. Welcome to day 2, session 3. Our focus for this afternoon will be on human rights, poverty, and social justice. We have 5 interesting talks lined up this afternoon. We will listen to all 5 the presentations. Once we have completed the presentations, there will be a Q&A session. So I request that everyone who has questions, please make use of the Q&A question section in the Zoom function at the bottom of your screen. You are welcome to post any questions, and you can also indicate to which speaker you are wanting to address the question. Feel free to also use the chat if needed. Once we have completed the first session for this afternoon, we will move to session 4, where again we have 5 very interesting talks. Might be above my headspace, but I'm sure that all of us will be able to learn something this afternoon. I want to start off by thanking all the presenters for your hard work and your dedication. Thank you for making time available on this afternoon to also introduce yourself and your project, your research area, and hopefully you can make new connections, grow your network even through the session this afternoon. So I would like to start off by introducing Mr. Fokpa. He's a licensed Liberian lawyer with an LLM from the University of the Western Cape. He also has 2 undergraduate degrees in general law and sociology from the University of Liberia. The title of his presentation is The International Bill of Rights Without Rights to Peace: Gap in the Implementation of the United Nations Vision for Global Peace. Thank you, Mr. Fokpa.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see?
We only see USAID screen from the American people.
Oh. Let me. Can you see now?
Yes, you can put it in presentation mode.
All right. Okay, sorry. Okay.
So I think
Much better.
you need to change your settings. We unfortunately see all your slides. So just change the display settings at the top. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's
And now
better.
we can see your slides. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. My name is Moba Fokpa Jr. from UWC LLM, and I'm also doing a second master's at University for Peace, UNICRI. So this morning, my presentation is about the topic you've already heard: International Bill of Rights Without Rights to Peace, a gap in the implementation of the United Nations Vision for Global Peace. This study is presenting some of its processes or ongoing activities using the argumentative presentation. And I should be talking about the right to peace within the framework of the United Nations chapter, and how that has gone on to few literature reviews, and then some findings and discussion. So the right to peace is within the context of the Sustainable Development Goal 16. It talks about peace, justice, and strong institution. Today I am Looking at the prioritization of Sustainable Goal 16, yesterday a strong argument was made that the thing it should have been goal number one, and I strongly agree with that. And so let's now introduce the International Bill of Rights. The International Bill of Rights is a collection of three documents. Of course, you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These are the three documents that we are collectively referring to as the International Bill of Rights through all this presentation. And the argument we are presenting is that there should have been a fourth one, which is a right to peace, and the right to peace was actually omitted. If you take a retrospective look at the United Nations chapter, the chapter for the United Nations. So let's take a little historical background and a tour. If you check from 1914 to 1918, there was World War One, and then by 1920 we had the League of Nations Covenant signed, but the League of Nations did not go anywhere because it refused to provide peace to the world as was anticipated, and so now the war plunged into World War II from 1939 to 1945. By 1945, there was the United Nations chapter coming into place to then guide global peace and human rights. I thought that background is important. And if you look at the chapter of the preamble of the UN chapter, the preamble kind of set up that history. It talks about the need to save succeeding generation from the scourge of war that twice in our life we experience, and is basically referring to World War One and World War Two. So we are presenting a kind of a research that is talking about peace that comes out of the United Nations chapter. So you want to see some of the messaging that can come out if you take a look at the preamble. One is that there can be no human rights without peace. You can as well as extend to say that the UN was founded out of the quest for peace, and as an extension to that, we think it's fair to say that the right to peace is the human rights of all human rights, since, of course, it is this right that is necessary for all other rights to actually be achieved. Taking a look at the UN chapter Article 55 and Article 56, Article 55 first places the obligation for ensuring global peace on the UN, and then shift a little and put some of the obligation on the member state by ensuring that Article 55 is achieved through the restoration of global peace that is necessary for the respect of human rights. If you go further into the Article 68, what Article 68 then did was to establish the Human Rights Commission that will guide the world in moving forward to what it meant to define human rights. And so as a process of setting up that definition of human rights, we now had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights coming into place. And so the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has actually managed to declare and define what human rights are, but it was not enforceable. So other two enforceable instruments then follow. What we try to present on this slide is to make the argument that there was a genuine quest for the definition of human rights, but then as the need to introduce a right to peace was swept under the carpet because of global ideology that got introduced in the process between the West and the East. And this diagram basically talk about the three instruments that are embedded in the Bill of Rights, and that on the far right here, we are saying there should have been a right to peace. What is peace? So in the literature review, we are taking Gatton 1969 research, where he said three basic principles that outline his concept of what peace is. He said it's a social goal that is attainable. It might be difficult, but it's definitely attainable. It should be agreed on by almost everyone. And then he has a very important one that says peace is the absence of violence. So you also have another one in 1999. He introducing the concept of positive and negative peace. And so we also went further to look at some of the key United Nations instruments, which are in the form of UN General Assembly Declaration, that started defining peace as the absence of war, but then it later on progressed to also mean that peace was not only the absence of war, but creating the enabling environment where justice, peace, and security could basically prevail. So when you see that concept, we now come to say, looking at the intersection of Garton and some of these instruments, we can look at peace as a form of human right. We can also know that it is the absence of war, but beyond that, we can also say that it is necessary conditions needed to have the human condition as dignity flourishing. And you can expand the concept to mean peace is a territorial obligation, but it's also an extraterritorial obligation. We want to talk about that ahead as we move forward. So look at this framework, and there is a nexus between peace and violence. Then, looking back at Gatton's research, you kind of see there is a direct violence, cultural violence, and structural violence. So this framework is under development. What we have done is to look at the three forms of violence and see how connected they are to the Sustainable Development Goal. So you have 12 targets under Goal 16, and there are other alignments that Goal 16 is connecting itself to. We are going to take all of the 12 targets on Goal 16 and see how they relate to the three different forms of violence, including structural violence, cultural violence, and direct violence. So what is structural violence? And we talk about that a little more to present an example. We said structural violence can be territorial, it can be extraterritorial. For instance, look at the territorial aspect of structural violence. This is an aspect of peace that you need, because without this, you have the situation where the system itself that the nation is operating on has contributed to undermining human dignity. So I wanted to align this with the Sustainable Development Goal that relates to education, for instance. And the data shows that you had more persons completing secondary school, but in most of those countries, you had teachers were not qualified in line with the standards set up by their various countries. So what this means is that you are producing more secondary school graduates, but the standard in terms of the graduation is not what it ought to be. So you can then say that the condition that is required by the state for students to get educated in a way that they ought to be educated is absent. That can be argued as a form of territorial violence, hence an obligation of the state that they are not meeting. But I also went beyond that. You can also see what's about pre-trial detention, for instance. This is a data that comes from the Sustainable Development Goal. As at the baseline in 2015, you had 11.1 million persons that were in prison, but that figure grew up to 11.5 million persons in 2022. And all of the 11.5 million persons, you have basically 3.5 million persons that were in pre-trial detention. So they are in detention, but then there is no formal conviction. So you want to take a tour at many of the countries, you will find a situation where the justice system cannot afford these people the environment necessary for the trial. We think that is a form of violence that can be attributed to a structural violence, and to ensure an atmosphere of peace, this has to be addressed thoroughly.
Mr. Fokpa, you need to finish, please.
All right. So another form of structural violence we also try to introduce is there is a global responsibilities. The responsibilities that other states have to perform to make sure that we have a setting of collective global peace. So take, for instance, some of the international organizations. You have developing countries that have higher membership, but in terms of decision making, they have very limited decision making, and this has impacted the ability to come out of poverty. For instance, we think if you are going to the to the area of restoring right to peace, we can address all of these. So since I'm out of time, final question that I'm asking as part of my discussion is, are we winning or we are losing? Look at this framework. This is a sustainable development goal. It has stated in the 2023 report that we are on target at 15% only. That means we are really off target. But if you see goal 16, it is not on target. Goal 1 is not on target. Goal 6 is not on target. And we think the reason why we are not going to achieve the sustainable development goals targets will be if you cannot have the enabling environment where we can have goal 16, the right to peace recognized and made a covenant, not just a United Nations General Assembly declaration, but a covenant that is enforceable where nations can be held accountable for what is peace and what are you doing to meet the targets of peace.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I will stop that far.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that we will get questions soon in the Q&A box or in the chat. You are also welcome to answer some of those questions as they appear.
Yes.
Yeah. Next, we have Dr. Sibanda. Dr. Sibanda is an NRFY-rated researcher and currently transitioning to mid-career status at the University of the Western Cape's Department of Geography, Environmental Studies and Tourism. And his research focus on environmental science. And today he will be presenting on leveraging UAV remotely sensed data to estimate crop water stress of underutilized taro crops in smallholder croplands. Thank you.
Thank you, Renier. I hope I am very audible. Confirm?
Yes, we can hear you. You can switch on your camera. We can't see you, and we can't see your screen yet. It seems like it's still coming.
Yes. Any luck?
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm presenting to you part of our project leveraging UAV remotely sensed data to estimate crop water stress of underutilized taro crop species in smallholder croplands. Colleagues, we are aware of the global challenges, the grand global challenges, which is more or less the human population growth, which has increased and in turn, more or less resulting in the strain in our food resources. And this has become a challenge in the sense that what we are seeing in the trends is that Africa, particularly Africa and other developing regions, are the ones that are facing more or less food and nutrition insecurities. What we also have realized is that there's been a discovery on traditional crops that we are more or less seeing being grown by our traditional farmers in the smallholder croplands, neglected and underutilized crop species. So now the world has become more or less interested in these crops because of their ability to withstand changing or climate variability. So today I want to talk about one of those crops, which is taro. In isiZulu, it's called amadumbe. So now the interesting part about these crops is that there is little information that is known about them. So ideally, the aspect of them being prone to crop water stress has not been fairly well researched. So it is in this regard that we wanted to evaluate, to phenotype, understand how this crop water stress can be monitored and whether it changes with time using remotely sensed data. Despite the fact that there are mammoth tasks or activities that have been done regarding crop phenotyping, what we have realized is that much of this phenotyping has been done using coarse resolution remotely sensed data measured by satellites. This data set tends to be coarse in terms of its spatial resolution, such that it does not capture the variabilities, the minute characteristics of the crops within smallholder croplands, which are fragmented and more or less fairly distributed. So it was in this regard that we decided to check and evaluate the utility of remotely sensed data that is acquired using unmanned aerial vehicles. So in simple terms, my aim of the study was to evaluate the utility of multispectral thermal infrared UAV data in predicting taro crop water stress in smallholder croplands. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are seeing is the M300 matrice drone and the multispectral camera. So ideally, we flew the camera at a height of about 120 meters, and we captured images of taro crops. And then we computed, these are some of the instruments that we use to measure the crop water stress of the plant. Ideally, it's the temperature and the ambient temperature, which you use now to calculate crop water stress index, which is more or less an indicator of whether a crop is having moisture stress or it doesn't have moisture stress. And then after computing this crop moisture stress, it is this crop moisture stress that we wanted to evaluate whether we can detect it using remotely sensed data. So in doing so, we used what is called the random forest machine learning algorithm. And then, so random forest machine learning algorithm is more or less a regression algorithm. So we will be regressing our crop water stress with spectral data. But before we did that, we first wanted to evaluate, can we really see whether there was crop water stress at different growth stages, which was the 11th of April and the 11th of May. And our results on your top left-hand side indicated that there was a significant variation in as far as crop water stress was concerned in taro crops within the smallholder croplands. And we realized that the crop water stress that we computed was in relation to other what you call elements of the crop, which indicate crop water stress. For instance, there was a positive correlation between our crop water stress and our soil moisture content. There was a positive correlation between our crop water stress with stomatal conductance. In essence, the way the plants are photosynthesizing and more or less taking in doing the gaseous exchange would be a very good indicator of how much water is being used, water use efficiency. So in conducting our regression, we compared random forest with other algorithms as well. And in our analysis, what we found out was that random forest produced optimal results. In essence, what you would see is your highlighted, what you call values are optimal accuracies after conducting a regression. So ideally, random forest was a better predictor in comparison to other machine learning algorithms. Our second finding was that we compared the accuracies associated with the prediction based on normal bands captured by the camera, as well as what we call vegetation indices. And also we combined the entire data set. And our results indicate that there is variability, but if you combine all the data sets, it tends to improve the accuracies. And on the bottom left, bottom right-hand side, I'm illustrating the accuracies associated with what I'm talking. So in general, what our results saying? Our results are simply stating that based on unmanned aerial vehicles, we have a probability, a potential of characterizing crop moisture stress variability spatially in a field, as you can see on your right-hand side of the image. What you see as bright red is more or less areas where we had more crop stress, whereas where you have green, that's where you had less crop stress. And we had quite a number of interesting, what you call spectral variables that were influential, including your red, near infrared, and red edge-based vegetation indices. So in essence, what does this all mean? It simply means means that we can enhance leverage on data that we can be capturing using our unmanned aerial vehicles to make informed decisions in field in relation to perhaps how we can irrigate, improve, optimize productivity in as far as smallholder agricultural crops are concerned. So in conclusion, remote sense data and UAVs seem to be optimal tools that can be used to characterize and generate information that can be used by farmers to optimize their productivity. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Sibanda, for saving us 2 minutes. Very interesting. Being a pharmacist, I would like to know what's the pharmaceutical value of these taro crops and how do you prepare it? So you can think about that and we can address it once we have the Q&A session. Next, we have Prof. Takalani Malutsi Masuku. She is an associate professor of biotechnology at the University of the Western Cape, and she's specifically in the Department of Biotechnology. She is also the principal investigator for the Molecular Science and Biochemistry Research Laboratory, or MSB Lab, and her main focus is to elucidate the mechanisms of stress tolerance in plants towards the development of staple crops to eradicate food insecurity. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Chair, for the introduction. So my tackle today is unveiling the climate smart crops for sustainable agriculture, which is very interesting as our previous speaker was talking about one of the indigenous crops. So for me, this research is very interesting because of what we see is happening in the world. For example, if you look into my slide now, you will see that on this particular map, poverty is one of the serious problems globally. But as we come in and we come back to Africa, you can see that based on the statistics, the World Hunger Index is very high in Africa. More than 50% of the African continent is actually suffering some serious, hunger. And coming to South Africa, someone can say, okay, we are still okay, as South Africa is at a moderate level of hunger. However, more than half of South Africans are actually known to be living in actual poverty. And I must say, this is going to be to get worse as the population growth is expected to reach about 10 billion in the next 20-25 years or so. It is expected that food production must actually increase by over 70% to be able to cater for this particular increase in the population. However, due to climate change, certain factors such as abiotic and biotic factors, high temperatures, recurring droughts and salinity, they seem to be affecting agricultural production. However, we see that farmers and smallholder farmers, like the previous speaker has spoken, they tend to use, artificial machines, artificial intelligence. They use artificial irrigations. They use fertilizers to try and maintain the yield and the quality of our crops. But we know that in turn, that affects, the food price. So now, for us to be able to end poverty and all of its forms, one of the solutions is to try and introduce or develop crops that are tolerant to these particular stresses. So two of my favorite crops, although I work with other crops, is sorghum and amaranthus. If time permit me, I'll be able to talk about amaranthus a little bit, but today my main focus will be on sorghum. Why sorghum? Sorghum is one of the indigenous crops, a very interesting crop, very important. It is the 5th most important crop in the world and the 2nd in Africa. And also, very most interesting is that it is drought and heat tolerant. However, if the drought persists or the stress persists, sorghum cannot be able to survive these particular stresses. Another important thing is sorghum is something that we need, or everyone in the world need, because from sorghum you can have your breakfast cereal, you can have your lunch, you can have your supper, and you can have your snacks in between. So that is a crop that also among other crops that we must pay attention to. As I move on, I would like to introduce or speak a little bit about how plants kind of get affected by stress and how they adapt, so that we may understand when I explain my results in the next slides. So abiotic stresses, they've been shown that they've contributed over 50% of crop loss in the world. However, zooming into salinity also is expected that I think in the next 20 years or so, most of the arable land, which is the land meant for agriculture, 50% of that will be affected by salinity. So salinity affects plants by causing osmotic stress, which is water deprivation, by causing ionic stress, which is the accumulation of toxic ions, and that leads to the overaccumulation of reactive oxygen species. And if they are not well regulated, they lead to oxidative damage, cell death, and hence death of plants and so on, and it will reduce yield. So the aims of the project that I'm going to talk about today was to elucidate the role of signaling molecules. Today I'll talk about calcium and chitosan, whereas there are other molecules as well, in how they improve the growth of sorghum and its adaptation to stress. So these two projects are the projects that were done by my MSc students in 2020 and in 2022, with the objective to germinate sorghum under salt stress in the absence and presence of signaling molecules, and to identify certain stress response traits in sorghum. I want to switch off the video because it's a little bit disturbing me. If I can do that. Okay, now we can go back. Apologies for that. Okay. So as I've spoken about the aims, I'll quickly go into the methods. The methods are simple, straightforward, and both students, they followed more or less the same methods, although they are working with different signaling molecules. Why signaling molecules? Because for plants to be able to respond to stresses or environmental factors, there are certain molecules that needs to be that perceive this particular stress, and they activate certain metabolic pathways in a plant, and then these metabolic pathways, they induce stress response and hence stress tolerance. So that is why we chose calcium and chitosan. So the first student germinated sorghum seedlings in water only, which served as a control, and also using different treatments, different salt concentrations, using sodium chloride, 200 and 300 millimolar, and treated with calcium chloride at 5, 15, and 35, whereas the second student used only one salt concentration, which is 300 millimolar, treated with 2 chitosan concentrations, 0.25 and 0.5 milligram per mils. And also of importance is that we study the effect of salinity at different growth stages. The one that treated with calcium looked at germination, the germination growth, and then the other person looked at vegetative growth. So to be able to understand the effect of salt and how sorghum responded to this particular stress, we looked at morphological and physiological traits, which are the growth traits and the anatomy and element distribution. We look at the biochemical response, where a plant will just activate certain biochemical pathways to respond to the stress. We also look at molecular traits, and the data was analyzed using two-way ANOVA, and where necessary, I remember we used Tukey test as well. So looking at the first results, like I said, although sorghum, it is known to be drought tolerant or salinity tolerant or heat tolerant. However, if these particular stresses, they continue or they prolong, or if there's high sodium chloride in the soil, sorghum cannot be able to grow. As you can see there in figure A, you can see that under normal conditions, there was growth, length in the root and the shoot of sorghum. However, when salt was introduced, then there was a decrease in the growth. However, when the student applied, calcium chloride, we saw that the growth was restored. However, not to where we wanted it to be. So we further looked at the anatomy of the plant, where we looked at the epidermis, which is, as you can look at C there, under stress, there was shrinkage. We look at the vascular bundles at G, under stress. There was also shrinkage, and also there was thinning of the layers. And these structures are very important because they play a role in water and nutrient transport in the plant. So we know that salinity, what it does, it deprives the water in the plant, and it also causes ionic stress. So it was very important for us to also look at these particular structures. So we also look at the fact that we know that when plant is under stress, there will be accumulation of reactive oxygen species. In this particular instance, we measured hydrogen peroxide, and we saw that under high salt concentration, there was a high accumulation of reactive oxygen species. And like I said, if these are not controlled, they will lead to oxidative damage, and the plant will not be able to grow. However, application of calcium reduced this particular reactive oxygen species. As you can see there, especially under 35 millimolar calcium chloride, there was a reduction in these toxic molecules. Furthermore, when we wanted to understand what could be the process or the pathway that was involved in the reduction, or what did calcium activate to try and reduce this ROS accumulation, we looked at the antioxidant pathway, where we looked at ascorbate peroxidase, which is responsible for scavenging hydrogen peroxide. What we saw in the results is that under 300 millimolar sodium chloride stress, there was an induction of this particular enzyme. However, when calcium was added, there was a reduction, meaning that calcium did not activate the antioxidant enzyme ascorbate peroxidase. So we went further and we looked at nutrient distribution, because like I said, salinity causes ionic stress. So we measured the amount of sodium ion, a toxic element, to see how it affected sorghum. We saw that in the presence of sodium chloride, that is B over there was a high sodium to potassium ratio. And then when we added calcium, that particular ratio decreased. The reason why we looked at sodium potassium ratio is because sodium ion stress is known to decrease or to prevent the absorption of essential elements, as you can see over there. However, calcium was able to prevent that particular situation. We therefore now look at the issue of water. We say, okay, we know that osmolytes, in this particular instance, proline, plays a role in balancing, the water osmotic balance. And we saw that calcium actually did something. So in the presence of sodium chloride alone, there was an increase in proline. When we added calcium, we saw that proline did not decrease. So it was left at that particular level to maintain the osmotic balance. Furthermore, we looked at if indeed there's a reduction in the sodium ion, which is toxic, what is the other mechanism that is involved? We therefore investigated the transcript or the expression of a sodium hydrogen antiporter gene, which plays a role in the exclusion of sodium ion into the vacuole. And what we saw there, we saw that this particular gene was not induced over there in purple, was not induced under the salt stress, slightly induced after under 5 millimolar calcium chloride, and there was a high induction at 35 millimolar sodium calcium in the presence of salt, which suggested that the way that calcium induces sorghum growth and salt adaptation, it is through the exclusion of sodium ion, which is a toxic, by the vacuolar antiporter gene. As we move on, my time is finished. Please. Yes, I'm summarizing. So the second compound was chitosan, which is a natural biopolymer. We also did more or less the same, and we showed that chitosan was able also to reduce the effect of salt stress in sorghum, as growth was improved when it was applied. Similarly, it also improved, the flow of water and nutrients by improving the structure of the vascular bundles. And we also saw that it does so by preventing water loss, by making sure that the stomata is closed under stress. So when the plant is under stress, the stomata opens and the plant continues to lose water. So calcium did that. We further saw that calcium, above all other things, what it does, it influences nutrient absorption. And in this particular instance, we saw that silicon was a highly absorbed when the plants were under stress, only in the presence of chitosan, which we believe that is exactly what induced sorghum adaptation to salinity stress. So in conclusion, like I said, these results, they correspond or they respond to poverty alleviation, zero hunger, Sorry, number 13 is climate change. And this work also suggests that this information can be shared with smallholder farmers. We can supply them with these particular compounds for seed priming, or we can even prime the seeds for them and supply them with these particular compounds so that they can improve the growth of our crops, quality and yield for sustainable agriculture. I am done.
Thank you very much. That was rather interesting. Again, another reason why too much salt is not a good thing, even for humans. We are next going to hear from Dr. Carly Louw, who is a lecturer in the Department of Language. She specializes in Afrikaans, specifically within the foundation phase. She earned her PhD from the University of Pretoria, and her title for her presentation today is a retrospective analysis of conflicted mother-daughter relationships. Thank you, Carly.
Good afternoon, Prof. Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, you can just play the presentation.
Okay, wait. Okay,
Yeah,
can you see now?
Yes, thank you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carly Louw, and today I'll be presenting the key findings from my PhD research titled A Retrospective Analysis of Conflicted Mother-Daughter Relationships. And the study focuses on understanding the dynamics between mothers and daughters, particularly in the presence of childhood adversity. And I realize that it's a lot different than the other presentations from today. Right, so the mother-daughter relationship is known for being intimate, yet very complex, with constant adaptations throughout life. My research focuses on how conflict, particularly influenced by childhood adversity, such as trauma and stress, affects these relationships. What makes this study unique is its focus on South African family dynamics, a subject that has been under-researched given the country's diverse socioeconomic and cultural context. So throughout literature, it's apparent that the longest relationship any daughter will have in her lifetime is with her mother. And considering this, the lack of research on such an important relationship across multicultural family units is worrying. So the main question driving this research was to uncover the dynamics that shape conflicted mother-daughter relationships. And by dynamics, I mean the ongoing interaction patterns, the conflicts, and how these are influenced by unresolved trauma and adversity within the mom and daughter's lives. In addition to the primary question, I also explored several secondary questions that provided deeper insights into this relationship. First, I asked, how do mothers and daughters define the concept of disagreement? This helped to reveal how conflict is perceived within the relationship. Secondly, I investigated how mothers and daughters describe their relationships retrospectively, allowing them to reflect on past experiences and events. I then examined how geographical and biographical factors shape these relationships, recognizing the influence of external environments and personal histories. Lastly, I considered which theoretical frameworks best apply to understanding these unique mother-daughter relationships, dynamics, ensuring a well-grounded analytical approach to my findings. So for this theoretical framework, I employed Dollarheide's ABCDXYZ resource management model. And this allowed me to look at family stress from a holistic perspective. And I won't go into detail in this, but as you can see that this model considers various elements such as the stressor, the coping resources that are available to the mother and the daughter, how families react on those, and how families act on those resources. And it also gave me a very clear idea of the demands that are being put on the relationship, as well as their cognitive coping abilities and how they took action. This model then helped me to unpack the complexities of conflict within the relationships. Right, I used the qualitative approach that was grounded in symbolic interactionism, and this emphasized how people construct meaning through their interactions, especially in the mother-daughter relationships. So my study involved 14 mother-daughter participants, so it was 7 case studies, and all of whom participated in retrospective interviews, allowing them to reflect on key events in their relationships. Right, so for the data collection, I used semi-structured interviews, and this allowed participants to explore their experiences in depth. I also employed life maps. That is a visual tool where participants mapped out key events in their lives. I also used the Mogel method, which was very interesting. It's a method that was developed by a professor at NWU, Prof. Vera Roos. And it's a projective technique where participants created clay models to represent their relationships. And this was especially important for participants who were not able to read or write. These methods helped me to capture not just what happened, but how the participants emotionally processed these events. Oh, and sorry, I forgot to mention the guided observations that also allowed me to observe the interactions between the mothers and the daughters. Right, so for the discussion of data, I think there's too much info to explain in 10 minutes. But for the data, it was necessary to use the ACE questionnaire. That's the Adverse Childhood questionnaire. And this helps to determine the number of stresses that an individual has experienced prior to his or her 18th birthday. So I had to compile this questionnaire for all participants, and the focus of the questionnaire is on emotional and physical stresses, as well as the household circumstances in which the individual was raised. So the literature affirms that individuals whose ACE score is higher than 4 are more likely to experience challenges in terms of their health and behavior, while a score of 6 or more puts the individual at risk of a shorter life expectancy. So just to give you an idea, the participant with the highest score was a 7, and the mother-daughter pair that who with combined scores had a total of 13. So it gives you a very good idea of the challenges that these participants faced. And how I integrated my data with the theoretical framework, I wrote a narrative for each participant that gave me a very good idea of how everything was structured. And then I compiled a summary of each participant's stimulus, for example. So I'm just going to show you one slide of how I took their life experiences, and so all of the names are pseudonyms. It's not their true names, as you know. So this is just the first phase of the theoretical framework, and I put their life circumstances in the blocks. As you can see, relocation and the death of a parent, problematic attachment was a huge issue under the participants, homelessness, abuse, unemployment, unwanted pregnancies, poverty, and rejection. And as you can see, there are a lot of other ones as well that I did not mention. Right, so for the findings, one of the key findings was the prevalence of rigid communication patterns between mothers and daughters. And this was often linked to unresolved trauma within their lives. I found that conflict often peaked during the daughter's adolescence, a time when the need for independence clashed with the mother's protective instincts. This created ongoing cycles of conflict that many participants struggled to break. The second one was the profound impact of adverse childhood experiences on the mother-daughter relationship. Many of the mothers in my study had experienced trauma themselves, which often affected their parenting. This led to attachment issues, particularly when mothers and daughters were separated for long periods of time, whether due to work or other circumstances. And just as an example, a lot of my participants were raised by grandparents. So The implications for practice, the findings have important implications, not just for families, but also for educators, social workers, and policymakers. Addressing intergenerational trauma could significantly improve family dynamics, while early childhood interventions could help mitigate the effect of ACEs. The role of extended family and community support was also evident in how relationships weathered during times of adversity. And in conclusion, despite the challenges posed by conflict and adversity, the bond between mothers and daughters remains resilient. There are clear opportunities for intervention, particularly in helping families develop healthier ways of managing conflict and supporting each other through difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carly. That was quite interesting. Again, just highlight the importance of family and also the responsibility of parents in our society. So our last presentation for this session this afternoon will be from Prof. Munir Abdurraf. He's an associate professor at the Department of Private Law at UWC. He is an admitted attorney and a sworn translator of the High Court of South Africa. The title of his presentation this afternoon is A Constitutional Analysis of the Position of an Apostate Minor Child for Purpose of an Islamic Will and Islamic Distribution Certificate within the South African legal context. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Coetzee. Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to present my paper. So my presentation looks at a constitutional analysis of the position of an apostate minor child for purposes of an Islamic will and Islamic distribution certificate within the South African legal context. All right. So the structure of the paper is as follows. Firstly, it looks at an overview of the application of Islamic law succession in South Africa, whereby Muslims are in South Africa for over 100 years. And the current status of this Muslim community is approximately over 1.3 million people. Now, in terms of the South African Constitution, it does provide for freedom of religion. And in terms of the South African common law, it allows for the right to freedom of testation. Now, however, in terms of Islamic law, there is a position concerning an apostate, be it a child or any person inheriting in terms of Islamic law. So, the issue of apostasy within the Islamic law context is looked at with a focus of it being a disqualification for purposes of inheriting. The article then looks at whether a disqualified minor child could successfully challenge the validity of an Islamic will and Islamic distribution certificate based on South African constitutional principles. So the article then concludes with an analysis and a recommendation. So firstly, by looking at the scenario, right? So a person, a Muslim person is there, and he then drafts a will in terms of South African law, meeting the requirements of the Wills Act 7 of 1953. And so all legal requirements are there. And in terms of freedom of testation, as found in South African law, you can bequeath your estate as you so wish. Now, freedom of testation within South African context allows a person to bequeath his or her estate or assets in the estate as he or she pleases. However, it is subject to certain limitations. Now, one of these limitations is that the freedom must be practiced within the framework of the South African Constitution. All right, so let's get to the scenario. Now, a Muslim testator could draft a will stating therein, based on his freedom of religion and freedom of testation, that his or her estate must evolve in terms of Islamic law, and that the executor of his or her estate must obtain an Islamic distribution certificate from a qualified Islamic law expert that should list the Islamic law beneficiaries of his or her estate at the time of his or her demise. That type of a will, based on freedom of testation, could be referred to as an Islamic will. Now, the beneficiaries are not referred to in the will. However, there is made a statement in the will that refers to an Islamic distribution certificate, and that certificate would be drafted by an institution like the Muslim Judicial Council, South Africa, based in the Western Cape. Now, the will says, based on freedom of testation and based on the freedom of religion and South African law principles, that the Islamic distribution certificate that is now issued by the Muslim Judicial Council would be binding on the estate of the deceased person. Fine. Now, in the scenario, there is, however, a bit of a curveball. One of the descendants or the children of the deceased person is a child, however, that is now the child under the age of 18 that is an apostate. And more specifically, the scenario I'm looking at is where the child is 17 years of age, still a minor, and obviously big enough to make a decision in this regard. Now, in terms of South African Constitution, obviously we're looking at Section 28, and Section 28 of the South African Constitution provides that the interest of a child is of paramount importance, right? So we should look at what is the best interest of the child. And in terms of Section 9 of the South African Constitution, it says that you're not allowed to discriminate against a person based on religion. Right, so freedom of religion is used in order to draft the Islamic distribution certificate. The Islamic institution basically comes into play. They issue the Islamic distribution certificate, but however, the apostate child is not found, is not listed as one of the beneficiaries, as one of the children, due to being an apostate. Now, if you look at South African jurisprudence, there's a number of cases that have gone to the courts, the high courts, as well as some have gone to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and others have gone up to the Constitutional Court. And the most recent development, as far as discrimination is concerned, is the King versus the Jaga case. Now, in this case, there was a person who owned a land, and when he passed away, he left it to his children, and thereafter he left it to his grandchildren, but thereafter it only went to those via male linkage. Right, so those that have gone, that are related to the deceased person via female linkage, they are automatically disqualified. And this was deemed to be discrimination based on sex, basically, because you via female, you do not inherit. Had you been via male, you would have inherited. All right. In the High Court, they said that freedom of testation should trump the right to equality, because there's no specific right to inherit, whereby when the matter went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, they had a similar opinion. The matter then ended out at the Constitutional Court, and in that court they stated no, that discrimination is not allowed, and the inheritance should basically go both ways. Now, in this instance of the apostate child, however, an argument could be made, however, that this is a different listed ground in Section 9 of the South African Constitution, and also keeping in mind Section 28 that looks at the best interest of the child is paramount. And this would also be considered by if a matter of this nature goes to the Constitutional Court, or starting off at the High Court before a decision is made in this regard. If that is the case, and a similar finding is made as in the King versus the Jaga case, then maybe Muslim testators should make use of the available opinion within Islamic law that allows for a child that is an apostate to inherit in terms of the laws of wasiyah, which is a mechanism found within Islamic law. And by doing that, we will basically, even though it is a minority opinion, it will then give effect to Islamic law, as well as be in line with South African constitutional provisions in this regard. And also, it would obviate and leave that difficult questions to be this at least to be dealt with by the South African courts, right? So that is by and large an overview of what this paper is all about. And I look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Munir. Very interesting. I'm always amazed at how lawyers can recite all the laws, the regulations, and even know the numbers by heart. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat. We have reached the end of session 3 for this afternoon. And I would like to open up the session now for anyone who has questions for any of the speakers. Please make use of the chat or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I have received one question, and I need to ask all presenters to please be brief in your answers. This is not an opportunity for you to extend your presentation, but really give us a quick answer or a recommendation on the question. So the first question is to Mr. Fokpa. You sort of indicated at the end of your presentation that we are probably losing the battle for peace. And so if we are losing, what can be done to remedy and ensure global peace? I'm going to just give him 30 seconds or so to think about that question. I would also like to ask the two presenters, Prof. Takalani and Dr. Sibanda, if they could perhaps just enlighten us on any community engagement work that's been done in communities to create a demand for the crops that they have indicated is potentially a viable crop to end poverty. So the taro and the sorghum. Sorghum we know is more well known, but it still sounded in your presentation that it's not really crops that is used like others. So are you aware of any work done in the communities to create a demand for those crops? Then there is a question, what is the irrigation system used for the taro crops? So can we please start with Mr. Fokpa to answer us?
Thank you so much. So my overarching recommendation is we need to take the rights to peace from the state of declaration, that is just a political act. We need to have it into a treaty or a convention that is enforceable. And once we have it into a treaty and convention that is enforceable, you have basically a treaty body or a committee that can review actions threatening peace, and you can find that enshrined into nations' constitutions, such that even some of those nations are held accountable for actions that threaten peace. You would then find human rights bodies into regional areas like whether it's Africa or Europe, trying to have supranational judicial bodies to adjudicate matters relating to the rights to peace. So that's how I will answer.
Okay. So I just have another question for you based on your presentation. When I listened to, what is peace, I also wonder, on the Cape Flats, where there is violence, it's not really war, it's often described as war, there is also absence of peace, and so that's a violation. Don't know if you're
Yes, basically, that's in fact, you have, once you measure peace, people think that it just has to be absence of war. So it was very clear breaking down peace into positive peace and negative peace. There are conditions under which people live that become very chaotic, even though there is no war. And so putting into place mechanisms to make sure that even where there is no war, people have access to a dignified life is a part of the arguments that I am making.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. To our two other presenters, would you like to comment? Mr. Sibanda, you can go first. Doctor.
Thank you, René.
Yes. Do you want to answer those questions?
Yes. I'm sitting here with Munir, so we're trying to avoid the what they call it, the sound coming. Yeah. Thank you for the questions. To begin with, the aspect of community engagement. In fact, let's start with the simplest one, irrigation. Okay. The crops that we're working on, they are more or less rain-fed. So it's a typical communal area, and taro is mainly planted by what you call villagers in the more or less smallholder communal areas. So it's rain-fed typically, and the cultivation is done mostly with limited resources. So it's more or less farmers who do the hand sowing and weeding, etc., etc. Manure is used and all more or less close to organic materials. In terms of community engagement, this is what we are doing. This is one element of the bigger project. So much of our work has been funded by WRC, as you noted in my slides. So we are a bigger group. I'm looking at just a slice of the pie. And there are other, what you call, of our colleagues who are looking at the economic section, the crop health, the actual, what you call, science that was presented more or less close to the Prof. Mlaudzi. So now, in that context, we have tried to come up with a scenario where farmers are co-creating, being part of it, and more or less presenting their challenges. So what we have done within the bigger group is to set up in Swaimani in KwaZulu-Natal, an area where farmers come together as a group, open up banks, and then help each other in terms of farming. And then we provide the knowledge on how these crops are grown and what varieties are better and things like that. And then my research comes in the application of remotely sensed data in terms of trying to find out how we can now channel information that can be used by farmers to optimize their production. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof. Takalani, do you want to add something on that question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So thank you for answering that question regarding the irrigation system. So I think I have a little bit more questions, which I will email Dr. Sibanda, and then I will take this discussion somewhere else because it's very interesting, very interesting. So regarding sorghum, sorghum is a well-known plant. You go into shops, you will see that there are so many food products that, are produced from sorghum. However, how people utilize sorghum and other indigenous crops, it depends on the area where a person is based. If you go more into the rural, the deeper rural, for example, crops like taro crops, the amaranthus, the other crop that I said is one of my favorite, you'll see that in the village, those kind of crops are more consumed as compared to the city or the urban places. And it is because of not being known so much or not being well advertised so much. So that is where community engagement comes in. So far, I am not aware of so much of the community engagement around those crops. We are planning a community engagement in the next month. We are going to Khayelitsha, to the village. We are going to meet, I'll call it a village, but it's a location. We are going to meet with street sellers. They call them social, sellers, street sellers, where we are going to introduce these crops and say, these are the crops that you can grow them with limited resources, like Dr. Sibanda said. You don't need to do a lot of irrigation. You don't need to apply a lot of fertilizers and so on. And you can still get the same nutrient content as you can from spinach, from maize, and so many other crops. But that is where I am starting.
Great. Thank you very much to the session presenters. We appreciate your time. We are now going to move into the last session for this afternoon, which is session 4, Net Zero Transformation Technology, Fourth Industrial Revolution and Digital Transformation. The first presenter for this afternoon is Mr. Siwe Manga. He is a joint PhD researcher at the University of the Western Cape and Vrije Universiteit Brussels. He also serves as a research assistant in the CoLab for E-Inclusion and Social Innovation Unit. The title of his presentation this afternoon is Exploring the Impact of Digital Disruption on Organizational Strategy and Employee Resilience in SMEs, a Systematic Literature Review and Research Agenda. Is Mr. Manga here? Yes.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon.
Good
I hope you
afternoon.
can see my presentation.
It's not sharing yet.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you very
set.
much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof. Without wasting any time, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my research. As already said, title of my research is Exploring the Impact of Digital Disruption on Organizational Strategy and Employee Resilience in SMEs, a systematic literature review and a research agenda. So the outline of my study, I will start with giving a bit of a background, and then I'll go into my methodology, and then I will share some of the results from the systematic literature review. One thing very important to note that is study is still under development, but I will now just share what I've already discovered. So in terms of digital disruptions within SMEs, we have seen the rapid developments in terms of emerging technologies, AI, big data, robotics, and we have seen that most SMEs or most organizations within the private sector, even within the public sector, they've kind of found it an imperative to adopt these new technologies. It's no longer a need, but it is a matter of, rather, it's no longer an option, but it is a matter of survival. Without adopting these technologies, then they will lose on other benefits and positive outcomes from adopting these new technologies. And we are saying that digital transformation, which is something that is happening across all different spheres of life, that is also something that is actually happening across all industries. And we are saying that SMEs, when they take this step into transforming their services, transforming operation, transforming their skills, they're actually gaining a competitive advantage. They're actually working towards growth, whether it's through value, and it is a matter of survival. They cannot operate within the digital age or within the digital economy without actually using these opportunities for them to actually grow in business and grow within industries. But also we are noting that these, as much as they are portrayed to be bringing or to be presenting a lot of opportunities for these organizations, but we are also saying that there are challenges that come with adopting new technologies. For example, according to the World Economic Forum in 2021, they said that about 89 companies globally have a skills gap, and they've credited that to the adoption of new technologies. And that digital transformation within the industry is actually widening the digital skills gap between employees and between sectors and between industries, which requires the upskilling of the workforce in order for these organizations to continue adopting more and more technologies. They actually need to also focus on how do they upskill their workforce. And these are some of the important skills that have been identified in literature, such as your 21st century skills, your future work digital skills, and employee digital resilience as one of the measures, as one of the important type of skills that employees need to actually also survive and to actually be able to contribute and to perform within these industries. We are also noting that the number of SMEs, according to the CEDA survey in 2021 in South Africa, was about 2.4 million, which shows that there is a huge number of these types of organizations within South Africa, and also that in our national accounts, they also show evidence that majority of our working force or for our working population is actually employed within the SMME sector, which shows how important these organizations are. And in terms of the questions that this review aimed to answer, first one was, how do these emerging technologies impact organizational strategy and employee resilience in SMMEs? Secondly, what are the organizational practices to develop employee resilience in the process of digital transformation? Try to understand and respond to this impact by developing employee resilience. And the methodology that I utilized was the preferred reporting item for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And I looked at publications from 2012 till 2024. And these were the databases that I used, the Web of Science, Scopus, and EBSCOhost. And a total of 887 peer-reviewed articles were retrieved from those databases. They had to be taken through a selection criteria that I already developed and designed before going into these databases. And they looked at specific technologies within those databases. And all of the articles that I sourced had to have one of these terms, such as your emerging, your digital, your innovative technologies within the context of SMMEs. Just to rush it, some of the things that I had to consider with language, also in terms of the time frame, when was it published? Was it published in a peer-reviewed journal? And in total, from that 887 articles, I ended up, after going through the process of selection and inclusion, selecting only 22 that were included as part of the systematic review. So, in response to the first question, how do emerging technologies impact the strategies in SMMEs? So firstly, we identify that they force SMMEs to redefine their business strategy, and SMMEs, they make use of adaptation strategy in response to the impact of these new technologies. These in the format of response strategy to the digital disruptions, but nothing really that speaks to the overall strategy, but rather strategies within departments or response strategy or crisis response strategy, but nothing really from the literature saying, oh. And also having identified within the literature that they will actually impact the operation, the structure, and the processes of this organization and how they operate and how they do things. And because of that, they have to kind of adapt into a new strategy, which might be in contrast with the basic norms and the values of the organization, and actually force change in the culture and in the identity of the SMME. And I also noting that the impact of this change within culture and identity has a huge impact in terms of the experience of the employee, in terms of how they relate to the organization. And when it comes to the impact of these technologies on employee resilience, firstly, we highlight the fact that when we speak of resilience, we're speaking of the capacity to be able to persist in adversity and to adapt to new circumstances. And we are saying that constant technological shifts, they necessitate firms to be agile. But how do they do it if the nature of work is constantly changing, jobs are being transformed, and operations are constantly changing because of these changes? We are saying advanced technologies are changing the type of skills and competencies that are needed within the workplace, increasing the need now for new skills to match this transformation that is happening, which are digital skills and employee resilience. I would like to highlight the digital skills that in order for companies to be able to increase or to upskill their employees in terms of digital skills, they have also to focus on the resilience of these employees to be able to take up those skills that they're trying to upskill in them. Also, creating a fear of displacement, increased uncertainty of job safety, leading to a loss of positivity and decreased performance, fostering a culture of continuous lifelong learning. And just to skip this one, because I know that I'm probably running out of time, in terms of the development strategies that SMMEs are using or utilizing to develop their employees, I've noted from the literature that there's nothing really that is there that exists on how do they develop this employee resilience, but all of them are saying that this is a developable skill It's something that companies could focus and develop, but none of them are actually identifying how do we actually develop this skill. And in conclusion, there is a strong link between the adoption of new technologies, changes in organizational strategy, and the impact on employee resilience. Change in organizational culture and identity because of digital disruptions impacts how employees experience and relate to their work. And employee resilience is now considered among the 21st century skills that SMEs should promote in the skills development practices. Thank you so much, Prof. That is all from my side.
Thank you, Sife. That was interesting. You made it very clear to me. When I read your title, I was really concerned that I'm not going to follow what you are saying. But I think working in higher education, we all are resilient. And I think there were many disruptions for us as well that we had to adapt to. So our next presenter is Prof. Desmond. He is an associate professor at the University of the Western Cape. He's also an independent consultant with World Intellectual Property Organization. And the title of his presentation is Climate Adaptation, Innovation and Governance in South Africa. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. I've just unmuted. Is my screen visible, Prof?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so I have very few slides. They are very skeletal, but I'll try to speak to them in the next 10 minutes. Please let me know when I'm running out of time. All right,
Good.
so this project, my research is based on a project that is a collaboration between some colleagues in Cambridge University through the Cambridge Global Challenges. And the project is named Governing Climate Adaptation Innovation in Africa. And also some colleagues from my research network that I belong to, the Open Africa Innovation Research Network. The essence of the GOSIA project is to identify existing climate adaptation innovation capability in Africa, and also, scope out the climate adaptation innovation governance structure. The whole idea is to identify possible gaps for a broader long-term project on clean innovation, governance of clean innovation in Africa. And so this particular research is done within a period of 6 months from January to June 2024. And it's actually simply desk-based. So the information that I will be discussing today were drawn from text-based research, relying on public available materials. And specifically my research, which is part of 3 country survey, Nigeria, Uganda, and South Africa. My research focuses on South Africa to identify the existing climate adaptation capability in South Africa. And I decided to do that. We decided to do that through a climate innovator called Liquid Gold Africa. We will discuss Liquid Gold Africa's innovation capacity, as a case study, shortly. But it's important to just lay this brief background as to what the research is about. Let me state at the outset quickly that the South African part of the project is led by myself and Professor Caroline Nkube from the University of Cape Town. How do we define climate adaptation? We define climate adaptation innovation. We define it simply as innovative solutions or technological solutions that contribute to society's capacity to adjust to the present and the future impact of climate change. And of course, there are a lot of studies that have highlighted the impact of climate change. We find the impact of climate change in different areas, in different aspects of society, in agriculture, in water, in marine life, and even in infrastructure. Okay, but climate adaptation innovation help to provide solutions, that help us to conserve water, that help us to, produce green or blue infrastructure, that help us to preserve food and fight food security issues. Also help farmers to produce plant varieties that help to address to fight or to adjust to the realities of climate change. Now, Africa, as we know, is largely suffers or contributes very little to the climate change problem, but the impact of climate change is felt more in South Africa. In the next slide, we'll look at the particular impact on South Africa. So Africa contributes 4%, and as I will discuss subsequently, South Africa contributes more of this Africa's percentage to the global greenhouse gas emission. Of course, which also means that Africa contributes little, but bears more of the brunt of the climate change problem. Now, when we talk about climate adaptation, innovation, governance, the first thing we think about as lawyers is intellectual property law. In fact, as experts in IP law, is intellectual property rights, which includes patents, copyright, trademark, designs, even trade secrets. Now, the general thinking that is largely touted about intellectual property rights is that they contribute to foster innovation, but there's a different side to it. We've seen that IP rights are restrictive, and so to that extent, instead of fostering innovation, as it is said, it actually shrinks the innovation space. And then the question within the climate change or climate adaptation context is, which framework do we then adopt to ensure that IP rights serves the purpose of enabling access to climate adaptation, especially to countries in Africa, so that they can then adjust to the problems of climate change. Now, global discussions around climate change, especially within the context of the international intergovernmental panel on climate change and under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, do not really address the question of IP rights, particularly. They make provisions for technology transfer and the rest. But African countries, through, for instance, the climate change declaration of 2023 and the African climate change strategies, are beginning to realize the importance of a legal system that promotes incentives for climate innovation, but also promotes access to climate innovation. But to be able to then formulate that system, there needs to be evidence, research-based evidence on what is actually on ground in Africa as to the existing laws, national laws, IP laws, and what is actually on ground as to climate adaptation innovation, more broadly. And that is where it is within this context that our research finds relevance, because it tends to show through, a preliminary study what exists as far as climate adaptation innovation governance is concerned. Now, South Africa, of course, as we know, over 62 million people. It's a middle-income country. It has high level of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And of course, it has high dependence on coal. And like I said before, its high dependence on coal makes it contribute the highest share of, Africa's contribution to emission of greenhouse gases. A very interesting study that was done by some scholars, some researchers in UCT, and published in 2024 gives us an infographic view of the causes of climate change in South Africa. And as you can see, it is both multidimensional and multi-layered. We have problem of heat wave, droughts, heavy rainfall, and these have impacted our water bodies, impacted food availability, impacted, even human health. And so this underscores the importance of having a well-structured innovation governance system, and also innovation capability to inform climate adaptation action in South Africa. The governance structure, as it is from what we have found in our study so far, is that at the moment, of course, the National Development Plan talks about climate action, but the governance structure, broad governance structure that address finance, that address innovation and other climate-related actions, they tend to be fragmented until, of course, the Climate Change Act was passed in 2024 recently, which tend to now bring together all the actions that the Department of Forestry and Environment, Department of Science and Innovation have been, doing, together under the coordination of the Presidential Commission on Climate Change. Now, South Africa also has, different IP laws, including their traditional and indigenous knowledge law that was passed in 2019. But what we find preliminarily is that for climate adaptation innovation, it continues to increase despite the continuous or the increasing protection of IP rights in South Africa. Local innovators in the climate adaptation space are working around the IP system in the sense that they are exploring the gaps, like, for instance, public domain issues and some of the exceptions to IP rights, for be able to innovate. There's also, of course, the low awareness and use of IP systems. These are enabling, a kind of giving rise to an increasing tech-based climate innovation. But of course, we also find that South Africa, given its Africanness, has a large base of traditional knowledge that informs climate, that can inform climate adaptation innovation. We didn't go deeply into TK. We just found that existed. Our focus was on the tech-based innovation. Even though that is increasing, it is still very small. We find small local climate adaptation innovation because most of the tech-based innovation are actually imported. So there is still some gap, and this needs to be filled. So what we find that amongst these few tech-based innovation that is happening in South Africa, Liquid Gold Africa, a company based in Durban, in KZN, that was founded in 2016, is actually, doing quite a lot and helping to solve the climate change problems, contributing to help South African society, especially in the KZN area, adjust to the problem of the impact of climate change in the area of water preservation, in the area of sanitation, and even contributing to human health. And what is Liquid Gold Africa doing? Liquid Gold Africa has 3 key innovations it has produced. The Diamond Reactor, which is a blend of, which relies on urine separation. It's a system that helps to separate urine system, and it's able to then purify it into water for irrigation. It's able to then produce dry fertilizers for, to contribute to crop yield. It's also, its EcoFlow it's attached to urinals, and then it's able to then the EcoFlow system is attached to urinals, and it helps to, again, the urine separation process. Then, of course, you have the wee stand, which is structured for females, for women. Now, it helps women to wee without worrying about being infected. But the urine is collected and then processed, of course, through the Diamond Reactor, which is an off-grid innovation system. Off-grid in the sense that it does not rely on electricity. It is purely, it uses solar power. But this, and with all this, that technology innovation that Liquid Gold is putting together, it's able it produces annually over 6 million tons of water for irrigation. It helps to also, take out urine that would have seeped into water bodies in KZN, which means it helps
Prof. Desmond, we need to finish.
I'll be running off. It helps
Please.
to preserve human health.
Okay.
What we find, so I'll be running off now. What we find is that in all these, Liquid Gold Africa's innovation is scalable. It has presence in 10 Southern African countries and also in the Netherlands. So it's like an African innovation, climate adaptation innovation that can be, exported. And in terms of the SDGs, and this is my final remarks, Prof. In terms of the SDGs, it contributes to achieving, of course, SDG 9, which is innovation. It helps contributes to achieving SDG 13, climate change action, also zero hunger, and of course, so protection of marine life, and ultimately SDG 5, gender equality through its withstand innovation. It is an ongoing research, and your questions and comments are actually welcome. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. Desmond. There's already questions in our chat, and we will address them a little bit later. Our next presenter is Tomiwa Fapunda. She's a PhD student in the Department of Statistics and Population Studies here at the university. And the title of her presentation is The Impact of Climate Change on Gender-Based Violence. I did see her earlier on.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
I'm trying to set up my my slides and everything. I'll be with you shortly.
You need any assistance? It seems like Casey, do we have a slide so that we could perhaps present it on our side?
I can check, Prof.
Okay, it seems like she started sharing. Let's give her a few seconds.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Prof. I have my network is my network is bad, so I won't be able to share my video. Apologies. Okay, so the title of my presentation today is The Impact of Climate Change on Gender-Based Violence. Okay, so this is the structure of my presentation. I'll be talking about climate change, gender-based violence, and the prevalence in East Africa, Arab region, Pacific region, and the gender-related variables, and my conclusion and recommendation. So climate change is a significant alteration in the weather condition of a place, whether which include wetter, drier, or warmer conditions over several years or decades. Human activities are the main cause of climate change, and expert consensus has stated that unmitigated emissions of carbon are the main cause of climate change, and we will have several degrees of increase in global temperature by 2100, by the year 2100, if certain climate action are not being adhered to. So the high impacts of climate change are diverse, and they bring about detrimental effect on human health, water supply, agriculture, transportation, and economy. So global temperature continue to increase, and it will cause detrimental effect on agricultural practices, land use changes, deforestation, and burning of fossils and natural gases and oil. Notable recent examples of climatic disasters include Dubai floods in 2023, Pakistan flood in 2022, floods in South Africa, East African droughts since October 2020, and heat waves in South America. So the WHO defines the gender-based violence as the intentional use of force, power, and threat against a person or a group of people, resulting in physical, economic, psychological, or emotional, sexual or emotional harm. And WHO also gives us the estimate that 1 in 3 women, that is 35% of women globally, have experienced gender-based violence. So it's like a public health issue that really needs to be addressed. Gender-based violence can be in form of physical, economic, sexual, psychological, or verbal abuse. It could also be in form of stalking, harassment, property damage, or intimidation. So between 1982 to 2002, 38% of women that were murdered by their male intimate partner, as compared to 6% of men that were being murdered by their female intimate partner. The occurrence of this phenomenon is a major public health issue. Yeah. So I'll be talking about the correlation between climate change and gender-based violence now. Climate change is a major aggravator of violence against women. And women are at risk of gender-based violence during climate disasters. Economic disruptions caused by disasters also increase the GBV in families. Climate change impacts are already affecting food security, economy, lifestyle, public health, and environmental management. And this can lead to a surge in gender-based violence if not well managed. The objective of this study was to investigate the impact of climate change on sexual, economic, physical, psychological violence against women in diverse societal contexts. So this diagram is like stating the impacts of climate change on gender-based violence. So in Katrina, following the hurricane, the rape cases rose 53 times after the climatic disaster. Between 2016 and 2019, 1698 acts of violence were recorded in Mexico and Central America against women during environmental human rights defenders. So in Ethiopia, there were an increase in girls sold out into early marriage in exchange for livestock for families to be able to cope during prolonged droughts. And in Nepal, there was an increase in human trafficking during earthquake. After earthquake, there's always an increase in human trafficking. So the prevalence of GBV in East Africa. So women are 14 times more likely to experience during climate disasters as compared to men. East Africa has been enduring serious droughts for the past 40 years, and this has affected 37 million people. By 2030, nearly 86,000 Kenyans will be adversely impacted by the increase in ocean temperatures, sea level, amplified storms, intensity, and coastal flooding. In Somalia, the world fourth most gender inequitable country, GBV and climate change are severe And climate change, such as wildfires, flood, can lead to additional workload that may prevent women and girls from meeting their domestic demands. And this can lead to high tension in the household and gender-based violence. By 2050, an estimate of 216 million people, predominantly women and children, will be compelled to migrate within their countries due to climatic disasters. And this will increase the vulnerability of women and girls, because when they are displaced from their usual place, their usual home, they will be at risk of sexual assault, trafficking, hunger, exploitation, and intimate partner violence, as well as barriers to education, because they won't be stable to be able to enroll for schools, and this will lead to more complications and also increase in child marriage. So I'll be talking about the Arab region now. We have limited data for the Arab region, and okay, so I'll just go to the last one because I'm pressed for time. UNFPA Syria has revealed that a surge in GBV following the heavy snowfall in 2022 in northwest Syria. This increase was linked to unemployment, psychological distress, and displacement. Flood and drought conditions in 2019 resulted in internal displacement of 2.6 million persons. And this has heightened the vulnerability of women and girls to sexual exploitation, gender-based violence, and malnutrition. So for the Pacific region, climate change disasters such as severe flooding, tropical storms, earthquakes usually occur in Pacific region, and this has increased over time. Globally, there are 3 times more disasters between 2000 and 2009 as compared to 1980 and to 1989. The population of the Pacific region has also increased, so this will also affect their economy over time, and it will also affect climate change issues over time. When victims are ready to report GBV in the Pacific region, it was observed that they may not even get access to services or support systems that will help them in terms of recording their cases or even providing medical help in places where they need medical attention. Children become vulnerable to climate, to child marriage, and disruptions in their education and displacements during climate change. And there are sometimes the children will also lose their parents during climate. In the Pacific Islands, this is the graph that explains female and girls that have experienced lifetime physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Those that have experienced non-partner physical violence that are less than 15, and those that have experienced non-partner sexual violence and also childhood sexual violence. So the prevalence are actually very high. Okay, a United Nations Women's Study that used logistic regression and rainforest modeling has found the evidence that there's a causative effect of climate-related variables on gender outcomes. So I'll just go to the diagram that explains it. So this diagram explains that climate change will increase frequency in drought episodes, and it will increase the prevalence of child marriage, adolescent pets, access to basic water, access to clean water. It will reduce the access to clean water as well, and also the higher overall, the increase in temperature will also cause increase in child marriage, lack of access to basic water, and lack of access to clean fuels. In conclusion, achieving a sustainable future requires addressing and preventing gender-based violence in our society. With the increasing impact of climate change and gender issues, it is essential to integrate comprehensive approaches that addresses GBV and humanitarian projects for assistance during climate disasters. The World Bank initiative has provided women empowerment and disaster preparedness and response, climate resilience and reduction of GBV and assistance for community. The UNDP as well is working on growing awareness for the repercussion of GBV to optimize the reduction of GBV or gender issues, inequality, and poverty eradication. GBV interventions could include economic independence, education, providing education, and or providing other programs that empower agriculture. There's a need to integrate climate change and gender-based violence research into our research, and there's a need to also develop cost-efficient intervention to help with climate change, because the cost of
Mopiwa, we
adhering.
really need to move on, otherwise we won't be able to give everyone an opportunity. So I'm giving you 20 seconds to just make a final recommendation.
Okay. So the cost of adhering to climate actions are actually lesser as compared to the cost of not adhering to climate actions. So let me just go to the last one. So the adherence to climate actions will spur the achievements of SDG goals such as providing quality education, good sanitation, improving health and well-being, eradication of food insecurity, poverty alleviation, and building sustainable cities and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting work that you are doing. We'll wait for some questions in the chat and the Q&A, so please stay online. We will now move to Prof. Bimru. He is a professor at the School of Nursing. He is the coordinator of various postgraduate programs, and the title of his presentation for this afternoon will be Primary Healthcare Nurses Adoption of Digital Health Technology to Facilitate Healthcare Delivery in Cape Town. Prof. Bimru?
Trying to present. I'm not sure if it is.
No, we only seeing a white screen with a pen moving.
And now?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. There's something wrong here.
Can you stop sharing and maybe try again?
Yeah.
No, it's still a white screen.
And now?
Yes, you can just put it in presentation mode.
All right.
Thank you. We
right.
can see the slides.
Good afternoon, colleagues. The title of my presentation is Primary Healthcare Nurses, Adaptations of Digital Health Technology to Facilitate Healthcare Delivery in Cape Town. That is my presentation outline, brief background into the study. As we all probably know, there is limited resources, technological resources available in resource-limited areas for nurses, and some of them have little access, which is really very fragmented type of resources available in terms of digital technology for nurses. There are still lack of infrastructure. Cost of technology is expensive. There is also lack of human resources to train our nurses, and some of the system are also not reliable. So we looked at 4 areas in terms of how nurses perceive digital health technology in terms of its usefulness, and what is their attitude towards digital health technology, and whether there are some barriers available in terms of utilizing digital technology, and what are the enabling factors for them in future to use digital technologies. So we have purposely selected about 21 primary health care facilities in Cape Town, and we include all categories of nurses into the study, those who have more than 6 months experience in the clinic. And we have distributed about 130 questionnaires for those nurses who are conveniently available for us to complete the questionnaires. And after a series of follow-upping with them, we managed to get about 97 complete questionnaires, of which 4 was discarded due to incompleteness from the data analysis. So in terms of the result, as you can see, most of the nurses believe that technology is useful for their workflow, which facilitates their workflow in terms of providing patient care, and it helps them to accomplish tasks very quickly, and capturing patient data accurately, and also planning patient care. So, there is strong positive correlation between perceived usefulness and the perceived ease of use, which is very important. Technology, if they feel that it is easy to use, that means indicators they will use it. So no significant differences was found between different categories of nurses in terms of all construct. However, in terms of the barriers, the professional nurses significantly score lower than the non-professional nurses. Our assumption this could be because of more senior professional nurses may access more to technologies than the non-professional nurses. That's why their barriers are limited compared to the others. So regression analysis also shows that attitude barriers, perceived usefulness, and the perceived ease of use significantly associated or predict the use of technology. So the model explained that 53.5% of the variance in the use of technology with only one of the independent variable made a unique statistical significant contribution to the model, which is perceived use of usefulness of the technology, explaining 59.7% of the variance in the use of technology. In general, 75% of respondents had positive attitude towards the use of digital technology, which is very important. 5-6 years ago, it was 45% actually had negative attitude. This is quite an improvement. And most of them agreed that digital technology should be used for registration of patient data. It also helps them to share information between healthcare providers and healthcare teams. And it also helps them to accurately record patient data, which again helps them to increase the quality of interventions and design care plan. However, less than 45% of them felt that they can still provide effective patient care without the use of digital technology. This could be probably how they define digital health technology, because in terms of digital technology, which includes all the blood pressure apparatus, temperature, most of the equipment actually be digitalized, and they may not see what digital technology means in terms of the use to facilitate their care provisions. No statistical significant difference were found in attitude score for gender and professions. In terms of the barriers, as we all probably assume, most of them, they do not have internet access and no computer access, had no training on how to search health informations on internet, and do not know, they don't know, about 41.9% reported do not know how to use the internet. About 55.9% believe that searching health information on the internet can reduce nurse-patient interactions. This is in our assumption. Probably they may not understand at what time they have to use technology, and also defining what technology means is probably different in terms of their understanding. They are not expected to sit on the computer during patient caring time, and probably they feel that sitting with computer during patient caring time that really help reduce nurse-patient interactions. Others probably have using computer may take also their working time in terms of accomplishing their day-to-day patient care. So that's why they felt that some of them, it actually reduces productivity. I think this is also related to currently they're using some of them computer in terms of capturing the data, and they are not well skilled, and it takes them time to capture the data because they're using their one finger. And this is also related to the skills that they don't have in terms of using the computer. And about 24.4% actually reported that they fear of using actually a computer. So for us, in terms of enabling factors, is I think the positive attitude is very important. Also, the belief that computer actually helps them registration of patient data accurately, sharing informations, and developing quality of patient care are mostly the enabling factors for us to use them to use digital health technology. There are some limitations in terms of the study, the small sample size, and we used random sampling, and we also didn't include other healthcare workers into the study. Those are our limitations. And we have identified organizational barriers in terms of digital health technology and individual barriers, which is related to their level of knowledge as well. And the positive attitudes is which is very important in terms of the enabling factors. I think that is my presentation. I got a lot of information because of the time. We have made training after this for some of the nurses, and we have done some pre and the post tests, but I haven't presented it here.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Bimru. That was rather interesting. We often think that technology is new, but like you have indicated, you know, your thermometers, your blood pressure machines, your blood glucose testing kits, those are all technologies that have been used for many years. And so whenever new things come into the market or into the workplace, we fear them. So interesting findings, and I hope that there's questions coming in the chat on this topic. So our last presenter for this afternoon is Prof. Rian Den Haan. He's the head of the Department of Biotechnology here at UWC. He is the principal investigator of a big research group. He leads the efforts to create yeast strains to be capable of converting biomass sugars into second-generation biofuels and high-value chemicals. And so I'm going to hand over to Prof. Den Haan to also please read us his title. And so every moderator always have this fear that there's words in titles that he or she will not be able to pronounce. And so his title is Engineering Yeast Strains for Application in Biorefineries. And I'm not going to say that word. Thank you, Prof.
Right. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm that I'm audible and
Yes,
everybody can see the
we
slides?
can see the presentation and we can hear you clearly.
Right. So thank you. I'd like to tell you about our work in engineering yeast strains for applications in lignocellulosic biorefineries and how this addresses some of the challenges in the world and some of the sustainable development goals that I've listed over here. So this talk is going to highlight some of the work of two of my PhD students, Letitia Minnaar and Francois Kruger. But I'd like to start by giving a bit of background. We currently have, as I think everyone's aware, a fossil fuel-based economy where most of our raw materials and almost all of our energy is produced from fossil fuels, coal and oil and the like. This leads to a lot of pollution and it's kind of a linear economy. So fossil fuels are by definition finite and have severe economic and environmental impacts around the world, and this creates an overall unsustainable scenario. So we'd like to move towards a sustainable circular bioeconomy. In a bioeconomy, we use biological resources and biotech processes to produce goods and fuels, and specifically a circular bioeconomy where there's an emphasis on using biological resources, but also recycling and reusing and regenerating materials so as to minimize waste. So we want to start off with raw materials that are biomass-based that we can sustainably reproduce. We want to have sustainable production processes for fuels and chemicals. We want to reuse and recycle whatever is left. And we require technological improvements for all of these steps. So biofuel and green chemical production will play a large role in advancing the bioeconomy. How this works in essence is that biomass is used as the feedstock. So biomass will contain some of the captured solar energy in a way and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This then goes through a harvesting process, a pre-processing process where our sugars are released. The sugars are eventually fermented to a type of biofuel. There are different types. And when these fuels are burnt, the carbon dioxide is returned to the atmosphere. So you'll see there's kind of a circular movement of the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and then captured by biomass again. Now, it's not a perfectly circular system, and there is certainly a lot of improvement that is required. And also when looking at trying to use biomass for a type of fuel, we want to avoid this competition of food and fuel. So we don't want to be using land that is used for food production or water resources or anything to produce the fuel of interest. We want to be using the lignocellulosic biomass. So what is that biomass? I'll explain a little bit more about it on the next slide. But essentially, to move from a fossil fuel to a biomass-based economy, We need to be able to produce our biomass with minimal environmental impact. We need to be developing crops that are more suitable for the bioconversion to sugars, while also sustaining our food and fiber requirements. We need to have improved enzymes and conversion methods of releasing the sugars inherent in the plant biomass. And we need to engineer organisms that can produce the fuels and chemicals that we require at high rates and titers that can be implemented at industrial scale. So the lignocellulosic biomass is essentially part of the plant cell walls. It is a structural sugar. It is comprised mainly of three polymers: the polysaccharides cellulose and hemicellulose, and the polyphenolic lignin. So while it is quite inexpensive and non-edible and rich in 5 and 6 carbon sugars and quite widely available, it is difficult to break down into that component sugars. So it is a structural part of the sugar, and while cellulose is essentially just glucose units bound together, it's done in such a way that it's very difficult to break down. So it's not like starch, which is also just glucose, but that is very easily hydrolyzed. So a biological way of turning lignocellulosic biomass into a fuel of interest basically looks like this. We have our lignocellulosic biomass that has to be pre-treated. This would be some kind of thermochemical treatment and some kind of physical treatment to break the mass down to smaller material and open up the fibers to allow enzymes to act. The enzymes would then hydrolyze the polysaccharides and release the sugars. The main sugars here are glucose and xylose. And then a fermentative organism would produce a biofuel, and we would distill that to our fuel or chemical of interest. So it doesn't matter what the product is, this is basically what the scheme would look like. The type of organism that you might use in the fermentation might differ. So we've been using the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I've been involved in research in this yeast for the last 20 years or so. It is the baker's yeast. It is the same yeast that is used in wine fermentation as well. So it's very well developed for food in the food and beverage industry. It's also used in the so-called first generation biofuels or biorefinery fuel production. And it retains a lot of those advantages that makes it useful in these industries, in that it's an organism that has very high ethanol production rates and titers, and inherently resists a lot of inhibitors. And so we think that in terms of second generation bioethanol production, which is where your feedstock is the lignocellulosic biomass, we will find this organism to be very useful as well. However, it does not break down those polymers naturally, and it does not utilize one of the main sugars in lignocellulosic biomass, which is xylose. So that's what we are developing our strains to do. So these days, we don't want to just produce one product, a fuel product. In order for a biorefinery to be feasible, you need to be able to make multiple products. So when lignocellulose is your feedstock, you see that in biorefineries, the feedstock would be fractionated into 3 of the main components. It's not 100% pure, but it's a cellulose-enriched stream, a hemicellulose-enriched stream, and a lignin-enriched stream, from which your different products would be made. So in this study, we've been using natural Saccharomyces cerevisiae strain that have been isolated from vineyards and orchards around the Western Cape, and developing these as host organisms for possible application in biorefineries. So I'm specifically going to talk about our work in engineering these strains for xylan degradation. Xylan is the main hemicellulose in most sources of lignocellulosic biomass, and also the cellulose degradation, which is, as I said, a complicated polymer to break down. So in order to get a yeast to grow on xylose, it needs to first grow on the component sugar. In order to get an organism to grow on xylan, the polymer, it needs to grow on the component sugar xylose. So one of my PhD students, Francois Kruger, has engineered a xylose isomerase pathway into the yeast, and then also subsequently engineered it to produce a xylanase and xylosidase, which are 2 of the enzymes that are required to break down the xylan polymer. If I can summarize his PhD in one slide, which I'm sure he won't thank me for all the work that he's done, it would be to say that he's been very successful in engineering the xylanase and xylosidase activities into a strain that was previously engineered for xylose utilization. And we were able to turn the strain, which cannot grow on any of the Xylan polymers or xylose polymers, it could actually sustain growth on that material with this engineering that Francois has done. And more importantly, we were able to demonstrate what we call a consolidated bioprocess, which is where we have direct conversion of the polymeric substrate into the fuel ethanol. So Francois demonstrated direct conversion of the Xylan to ethanol, and we are not happy with the levels of this conversion, and so he's engineered the natural yeast isolate strains for growth on xylose, which we've improved with adaptive laboratory evolution, and he's subsequently engineered the xylanolytic genes into those, and he's currently in the last phase of his PhD to test those strains. Letitia Minnaar also had a very challenging task of trying to engineer yeast with the enzymes that would allow it to break down crystalline cellulose, and these are 4 different activities that are required. I won't go into the details. She was very successful in attaining the transformant strains and showing that the various activities could be measured in the different strains, and some of the strains perform better at higher temperature and other in the presence of acetic acid. Both of these are stress factors associated with the industrial fermentations. And again, she was able to also demonstrate consolidated bioprocess conversion of the raw materials to ethanol. Again, we weren't quite happy with the levels, and so currently in her PhD, she is engineering these strains with improved gene cassettes, which are going to allow higher expression of the genes, more of the protein being made, and the protein will also be attached to the yeast cell walls, which has its own inherent advantages. And she was able to show dramatic increases in the individual enzyme activities and in the release of the sugars from the polymeric substrate. And she's currently testing the strains in fermentations and looking also at some real-world substrates. So to conclude then, we believe that the utilization of renewable energy sources holds great promise to mitigate challenges faced by modern economies and achieve sustainable development goals, as I've mentioned here. And that natural isolates of Cerevisia have a lot of potential to be used as these consolidated bioprocessing hosts in lignocellulosic biorefineries. We have been able to create strains that could directly convert either the xylan or the cellulose component to ethanol, and we believe the production of other interesting chemicals in these strains are also possible. And these strains will now be tested on various real-world substrates, such as the waste material from the paper and pulp industry. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening, and I'll just leave up the acknowledgement slide.
Thank you very much. You explained a fairly complex process to me, very practical. Thank you for your presentation. We have reached the end of this session. I am going to open the floor for questions. There's a few questions that I will try and indicate who the speakers were. There was one comment and a question to Dr. Desmond. Thank you for your thought-provoking presentation on climate change and adaptation and innovation. And so due to the multifaceted impact of climate change, particularly on public health, so this is where the question comes in. How do you see climate change, innovation, and adaptation being integrated into health system practices, and particularly in terms of health promotion? How can regulation then inform adaptation other than what Liquid Gold Africa has done? So that's the one question.
Should I take
this? Just give me a moment so that I can just read all the questions and then we'll go one by one. So just for Prof. Bimru, in terms of the technology for nurses, do you think that some of the technology that is available isn't really useful for them, and that's why they struggle to actually use it? And have we assessed really what type of technology they need in order to be more effective in their work? And I think that's basically the questions that I could see. Okay. Prof. Desmond?
Okay, I see there are two questions for me.
Yeah.
I'll take the first one.
Right.
I will start by saying that I'm not an expert. I'm not a public health expert. So the question I'm going to answer again from the angle of innovation. And I would say that even though the question says other than what Liquid Gold Africa has done, I would still refer to Liquid Gold Africa. Now, the beauty about some of the innovation of Liquid Gold Africa that I highlighted is that they are already now partnering, and I didn't have time to say this, they are partnering with with hospitals around KZN, to incorporate their innovation, especially the we stand for female urinals and the diamond reactor, including EcoFlow, are already working with hospitals, public hospitals for that matter, around KZN to incorporate those innovation. Now, what regulation should we put in place to support this? We need a regulatory system that, first provides financing. There is a lot of climate finance accelerators, and I think South Africa is part of the African climate finance accelerator program. Okay. The regulators at the moment in South Africa, especially under the Climate Change Act, needs policies to key into that system. Then from an innovation point of view, apart from financing, the IP system needs to be structured in a way that it supports local innovation. How would this be done? We're not advocating that IP rights should be expunged. No, we are advocating, for instance, that the South African Patent Act, for instance, should contain things like compulsory licensing. In other words, limitations and exceptions that allow knowledge sharing, that allows collaborative innovation while promoting incentives for innovation. Such regulatory system will help them to foster innovation that will support climate adaptation and, in fact, mitigation in the public health sector. So such kind of regulation will support the work of innovators like Liquid Gold Africa. That's my response to the first question. Should I take the second one?
Yes.
Yeah, so the second one is saying, are there, the project centers on SA, Nigeria, Uganda, are there lessons that can be drawn from other countries that have successfully balanced IP protection and technology access? Okay, so this is the first time that we will be focusing on my research network will be focusing on climate change in Africa. But what we can say from other projects that we've done that are not climate change, of course, and the lessons, of course, can be, can apply in the climate change context, is that African national IP laws generally are structured in such a way that they are structured under the restrictive approach. In other words, increasing IP rights protection and less access, less room for sharing of knowledge. But that is changing now. For instance, as countries like Nigeria are beginning to reform their IP laws to balance the interest of right owners and members of the public to access knowledge. Within the continental level, work ongoing in places like, in contexts like the African Continental Free Trade Area, that is the AfCFTA agreement. There's an IP protocol that was adopted in 2023, and the IP protocol seems to take into consideration the need to balance the interests of the stakeholders within the innovation space. And those framework are also obviously applicable within the context of climate change. Yeah, thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much for that question. Prof. Bimru, do you want to answer or contribute? Yes?
Yes. The first question says, what technology available is not useful? Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think the question was around, is there missing technology that that's actually needed for them to actually adopt it? So is the technology that's out there is not really useful for them? And that's why there's a lack of adoption, perhaps.
I think in terms of our assessment, we looked at whether they perceive the technology available are useful for their patient care. When we say patient care in terms of collecting patient data accurately and analyzing those patient data and sharing those patient data with other healthcare providers, and also in terms of whether their digital equipment that's available for them is useful in terms of facilitating their healthcare deliveries. As such, there are few technologies available for them, and those technologies available for them are useful in terms of particularly the equipment that they use in terms of vital sign, temperature, and testing blood glucose level, and all those digital technologies are available. But what is not available for them, which is supposed to be useful, is some of the databases to actually explore and identify some evidence-based practice, and also some apps which they are not being developed by Department of Health, but it is not accessible for most of them. And in terms of sharing patient informations with some specialists, because remember now they are in the primary healthcare setting, and they need to have those technology using even email technology or internet technology to send some of the patient informations to the specialist or to other physicians as soon as they receive, so that they can get some support. And those technology are not available for all of them because they are not access to computers, very limited computers for admin people only. And but nurses, they struggle sometimes with scanning and sending information to the physicians when the scan are not working. But those are the technologies should have been available for them in terms of communicating with other healthcare providers to get support and facilitate their caring. Other than that, specifically, we haven't really assessed whether there are technologies available that are not being useful, because we know that previously we have assessed a primary healthcare setting, what technologies they have, but in general, they have very limited technologies in terms of computer and internet technology. But they do have some technologies in terms of equipment that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I answered the questions.
Thank you very much. We will take one last question for Tomiwa. Do you see the role of cultural norms in the way institutions respond to the link between climate change and gender-based violence?
Yes, thank you for. Okay, so there are several research that have shown that there's a relationship between cultural norms and gender-based violence, like trying to silence women from reporting gender-based violence due to the stigma around it. And also some patriarchal systems tend to believe that men's authority tend to prevail and there's no need reporting gender-based violence, and to protect family honor. And in terms of female genital mutilation, some African countries also, they believe that it's a norm to practice female genital mutilation without considering the health consequences of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've reached the end of the Q&A session. I would just like to take a moment to thank all the presenters for their time. Thank you for very insightful presentations. Good luck with your research and all the projects that you are taking forward. We will now have a poster session, and the research office, the admin team, will support us in going through the posters that was submitted for Research Week. So we will be given a minute or less, 30 seconds or so, 1 minute to just review a poster, just for those who have submitted poster presentations. You might receive some questions also in the chat based on your poster. Thank you to all of the poster presenters. We appreciate all the time and effort you took to also prepare those posters. I would like to encourage everyone who has any questions to perhaps make contact with the authors of those posters. So that is a wrap up for this afternoon. Thank you for everyone who attended from start to end. It was a very informative afternoon, even for me. I had to chair a session that I'm not very familiar with, but I'm grateful for the presenters who have been able to present their work in such a way that even I could understand it. So I hope that you will have a good evening, and please join us tomorrow also for another full day of sessions. Take care.
Thank you so much, Chi.